Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us in our last in the series for creating during COVID. I'm Katrina Railton. I'm the president of SPAC Junior Committee, and we're excited to have all of you here tonight. We will have a chat feature over to the side if you want to put any questions that you might have, and we'll save some time at the end around 7:45, where we'll all come back in and I'll help moderate the question for anybody who may have it. And one thing, make sure you turn all of your cameras on so we can see your smiling faces. But just be sure to stay muted just so that we can listen to the conversation and have your view set to speaker view for best viewing. For this session, you're also going to notice a new feature that we've added. We've added a closed captioning feature. So if you click on that feature, you can actually move it around or disable it if you want. So I know in some places it might block the view of some of the speakers. So you can move that around as needed. And if you've ordered any food from Tara Kitchen, we'd love to hear about it in the chat. Also, let's see the photos on Instagram. Post your photos at #CreatingDuringCovid and tagging at SPAC Saratoga, at Tara Kitchen, and at Austin Fantastic. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Sobol, President and CEO of SPAC, along with Aneesa Waheed of Tara Kitchen in Austin, an Ayurvedic chef and health coach.
Okay, so hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining us, particularly those of you here in the capital region on what has been one of the most spectacular days of our spring. And so I really appreciate everybody stepping inside. A few of you are outside. To join us for what's going to be the last creating during COVID of the spring. We'll pick it back up in the fall, but we will be soon rolling into some actual in-person culinary arts at SPAC events coming up this summer and throughout the fall. So stay tuned for what we're planning then. And I just want to say that particularly for those of you who are new to creating during COVID and to SPAC as a presenter of culinary arts events, that we really see the culinary arts as up there with all the other arts that SPAC presents. That the importance of food was never more visible and palpable during COVID, when we were all desperate to join with each other and share great food. And never has it been more evident how important the healing qualities of food, both physically healing and socially and mentally healing. So I wanted to start, many of you already know Chef Aneesa. She did our very first creating during COVID event. And she is just such a dynamic presence, not just as a chef, as really as a community activist and a believer in food and community for social change for the good. I wanted to start with Austin because I have kind of a story to tell that is something that's going to always have tremendous meaning in my life. Back in spring of 2019, I needed a little bit of a break away from SPAC before the season started, and I went down to Menla, which is a retreat center in the Catskills. And I was stressed to the nines. I was not sleeping. I was not in a good state. And I got to Menla, which is a Buddhist retreat center, just planning to spend some really quiet time and trying to sort of regain some equilibrium and quiet in my life. I was a little worried, frankly, because at a Buddhist retreat center, there's no alcohol. And you're on your own for figuring out how you're going to reduce your mind chatter and get into a still place. So I was a little bit on edge about how that was going to work for me. And I got to Menla during lunchtime, and I went into sort of a communal area where lunch was being served in a buffet style. And there were all these wonderful dishes that had names that I was sort of familiar with from having studied Ayurveda for a long time. But the remarkable thing was I ate that lunch and I walked outside and I felt something physically happen in my body. I felt calmer. I felt myself breathing. And as I walked through the woods in the afternoon and did a little bit of writing and working and everything, as dinner time approached, I found myself so eager to eat the food again that I couldn't wait for the next meal. And I went and I ate another of these meals, and I felt this profound sense of calm and just a state of being that I hadn't remembered being in for a really long time. And I actually went to bed early that night and slept like I hadn't slept in a couple of years, I think, honestly. And the next morning when I woke up, immediately I started thinking about the food. And I thought, is this really the food is having this effect on me? Because I couldn't tie it to anything else. And finally, at lunchtime the next day, I saw this young man come out and be putting the dishes there. And I was like, is this your food? And it was, and this was Austin. And it turned out that he was an Ayurvedic chef as well as an Ayurvedic practitioner. And he had been asked to prepare a particular type of Ayurvedic food for a group of Vedic meditation practitioners who wanted to be prepared mentally and physically to drop easily into a meditative state. I had no idea what I was eating. All I knew that for 24 hours, I was in this state of being that I really never wanted to leave again. And so at any rate, Austin came to Saratoga a couple of times over the next year, and he met friends and he cooked meals. And having studied Ayurveda for a long time, my mom was a yoga teacher back in small town North Carolina in the 70s. I was exposed to Ayurveda at a young age, but never had I experienced in such direct physical and mental results as that encounter with this incredible food that I was eating. So at any rate, that's a very long introduction, and I want to hand it over to Austin, who's become such a good friend and really wise force in my life, and he has his own incredible story about how he came to Ayurveda himself. And Austin, if you don't mind, like, hi, thanks for joining us, and just talk to us a little bit about Ayurveda in your life and whatever else you want to tell us.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for sharing that story. It gives me chills every time. Yeah, that experience was so magical, and meeting you, and yeah, it's been so nice to build a relationship and do things in Saratoga and be here now to share all this with everybody joining. So thank you, Elizabeth, and thank everybody here. Yeah, my story with Ayurveda, my first career was in film and television. I was a camera operator. I was living in New York City and working like a dog, partying like a rock star, and living a totally non-Ayurvedic lifestyle. And I eventually got sick, and I ended up in emergency. I was in and out of doctors for 4 months. I had tons of tests, medical, everything done, and the doctors couldn't find out anything that was wrong with me. And I got to, a breaking point, and I prayed, and I was like, crying out for help. And I had an instantaneous conversation recall about this meditation one of my friends had told me about over a year prior to, this moment of, breaking and praying. So I hit him up. I was like, what was that meditation you told me about? And they told me. I went and took the next available class, and within a few days, my symptoms started to subside. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, what is this stuff, and how do I get more? So I asked the meditation teacher, and the meditation is called Vedic meditation. And she said it comes from Ayurveda. And she directed me to an Ayurvedic therapist who I immediately started to see. And so, the meditation working from the mind level, and then the therapist working from the physical level, I started to change my diet, adjust my lifestyle as much as I could, within the confines of my work, and just started going down this path. And I ordered some books, which were really hard to find at the time. Why, I don't know. This was like 6 years ago. Now you can like Google Ayurveda and find anything you want, but it was like a really small I feel like it was like a really small Wikipedia page and like 2 books on Amazon was like all I could find at the time on Ayurveda. And yeah, I just started reading the stuff and, stuck with the meditation. I saw the therapist like once a week or every other week, to do this, healing. And then within 1 month, all the symptoms that I had been experiencing for the 4 months prior were completely gone. And I was like totally convinced. And it was probably 3 or 4 months later after my healing experience that I decided I wanted to commit my life to Ayurveda, studying it and sharing it with people. And a lifelong passion of mine has been cooking. And so I was just like, oh, well, I could do Ayurvedic cooking. I could cook food that was Ayurvedic and people would come because the food was interesting. And then I could tell them that, well, yes, it's Ayurvedic food and this is why it's being cooked this way and those things. So yeah, I went to culinary school at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, and cooked in New York City and some fine dining places and overseas to really hone my culinary skills. And then I went to Ayurvedic school here in the US for 1 year. And then I just got back in August, end of August, beginning of September of 2020. I was in India studying at a couple of different Ayurvedic clinics there to deepen my Ayurvedic knowledge. And now here we are sharing Ayurveda and food with all the wonderful people and teaming up with Aneesa to do some awesome menu shifting.
So I love that story, Austin. Thanks for sharing it with us. And Aneesa, I mean, I've been pondering this so much. Like, first of all, getting to know you. You were our first creating during COVID star here. And it's so interesting because you grew up in India where Ayurveda is kind of just a part of the fabric of living and eating. And here we are in the United States. I think back to when my mom was a yoga teacher, like yoga, people still don't know what yoga was, right? And it's so interesting how, we're living in very difficult times, but we're also living in these kind of miraculous times that, growing up in the US, that we have the benefit of this incredible ancient knowledge that comes from India that is teaching us again, sort of living in balance with, ourselves, the world around us. And anyway, so like, I'd love to hear what you have to say about Ayurveda growing up and anything else.
What's really interesting is I was born and raised in India. And I think as we've talked during our pre-event meetings, it was just part of life. Ayurveda is so enmeshed in the lifestyle of most Indian people. We're constantly taking from it what we need and using, and that sort of stuff. My first, this is an interesting story. My first true, real deep dive into Ayurveda was actually in New York City, and it had nothing to do with food. It was because I had a very bad cystic acne problem. And there was a Ayurvedic doctor in Midtown who was treating people with skin conditions through Ayurvedic medications. And she was the only one who was able to really help me with that. So it made sense back then. It's like Ayurveda is part of life and, how we eat and all that kind of stuff. But Ayurveda there's so many different components to it. It's your food, it's how you live. I was talking to my 2 girls today about the event and what we're doing and the different body types, and they're 8 and 9. And I was talking to them about how Ayurveda even talks about how you should be sleeping, and the little one's like, what do you mean? Don't you just close your eyes? So, but it's interesting because especially after connecting with Austin and after talking to you about doing this event, I kind of like went back and started looking at books and reading more stuff and talking to my mom about it. And it's just fascinating how many different aspects of life Ayurveda actually touches. And at least for us within the Indian community and growing up in India, how it's so much a part of our life and we don't even realize it, things that we're doing because of the science that we've been taught from our birth, but not necessarily realizing that we're doing it.
And so, I think one of the first Ayurvedic books I ever bought was by Maya Tiwari, and it was called A Life of Balance. And it's still one of my favorite books on Ayurveda. But Austin, maybe you want to dive into it a little bit. I mean, even as a child, I remember looking at different people. You look at different people around you, and some people are wiry, and some people are more muscular, and some people are more saftig, and some people have, people have just so many different constitutional differences. And how does eating food or even taking supplements and herbs and medicines just sort of logically would affect different people differently? And that's kind of the basis of, to a certain degree, of Ayurveda, along with many other things. Like, Austin, you want to talk about the doshas a little bit and what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you're saying, recognizing the differences in people's physiology, all of this, Ayurveda, it's the language of nature. So how are we understanding nature's manifestations and then working with it? And in like Western medical terms, now we know that the doshas are genetic expression. And this has been correlated to the 20 gunas in Ayurveda. So in Ayurveda, we start with the doshas, and the doshas are three: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Vata is the air and ether elements. Pitta is the fire and water elements, and then Kapha is the water and earth elements. And all of this seems archaic because the language is from thousands of years ago. But the principles, what those correlate to, then once we understand what the body's majorative makeup is, then we can start to use things in our environment to nurture our balance. Ayurveda, it's all about balancing the internal environment with the external environment so that we remain disease-free. It's really interesting, the Western perspective of disease is if you're not sick, then you're healthy. Whereas in Ayurveda, the definition of health is a balance in all three of the doshas, a balance in all of the gunas, which are the qualities inside your body, a balance in all the dhatus, which are the tissues of your body, a balance in all of the malas, which are the waste channels of your body, sweat, urine, and feces. And then you're happy and healthy, happy and contented in mind and spirit. And so the definition of health in Ayurveda is much more robust than just, oh, I'm disease-free. And this is where, Aneesa, like you're saying, the science of Ayurveda encompasses so many facets of who we are. And it can seem extremely complicated trying to, what does this mean? And what does that mean? Once you understand kind of the core map, the core pieces of Ayurveda, which is Samkhya philosophy, and what those things mean for you physically and mentally, and then even just, you don't need to know the full science of Ayurveda to live an Ayurvedic lifestyle. And this is one thing that I so much love, working with people on, one-on-one or in classes and stuff like that. It's going to take a lot more time, obviously, than I can cover in this video, but, within a weekend or a few hours, just understanding the core principles of ourselves, and then what you as an individual need to do to move forward. An example that I often give is if you need to go somewhere, you just need to know where you are and what your destination is, and then punch it into Google Maps, and Google Maps will give you the most direct path to your destination. So with Ayurveda, I guess further on that, it's very simple for you to get from point A to point B with Google Maps. But Google Maps needs to know every street, every road, every path, if there's construction, not construction, all these things to give you the direct route, right? So with Ayurveda, with a little bit of knowledge, or with a practitioner, for you to get from unhealthy or whatever state of balance you're in now to an optimal state of balance, the path is very easy to follow. But getting someone to guide you along that path, would be the more complicated part.
So let's take sort of Pitta, which is more like the fire element, and those of us who have some of that Pitta driven quality to us, and just talk about that for a second, and kind of practical terms, because we all know there are certain things that we eat that make us feel tired. There are other things we eat that make us feel perky, or there are other things that we can eat. Like we all have those foods that affect us in different ways, and we're each different. What my husband eats and what I eat, like we would kill each other if we forced each other to eat the same things, right? So constitutionally, our food is marrying up with some internal, need we have. But if you are pitta and you're eating foods that are increasing that fiery nature, or the sort of creating heat in your body, that can actually be very detrimental. So can you maybe give us a couple of like just practical examples of like, things that increase pitta when you actually want to be reducing pitta in order to achieve that balance?
Yeah, for sure. So Pitta, fire type. This is exacerbated in the summertime, which we're moving into. And then it's also exacerbated by, heavily active lifestyle, maybe too much stress, overachieving goals and stuff like that. So a lot of those psychological aspects, paying attention to those is extremely important. And then from the dietary aspect, obviously, the things that are fiery, right? Chili peppers, black pepper, ginger, like these things are going to be increasing in heat. Wasabi, horseradish, anything that would be considered as spicy or hot, or kind of along those lines would increase pitta. And then some of the great foods for reducing pitta, and some of my favorites: coconut, any form of coconut, coconut oil, coconut water, fresh coconut. All these things are very good. Coriander seed is a extremely powerful one. Coriander fresh, or as we more commonly call cilantro, is extremely good. Limes are very good. Lemons are heating, but limes are cooling. So these you can use. Pomegranates are great. Grapes are very good. Anything that's astringent or drying. So that's where the pomegranates kind of come in. Legumes, beans, all these have a more drying principle, so are better for pittas. Which a note about beans, because I was talking to somebody earlier, soak them overnight and then cook them the next day, so that they're easier to digest, and then they'll be more beneficial for your body. So yeah, a lot of those things, you can keep yourself in check with. And aloe is like always one of my emergency go-tos. If I'm getting like too pitta, I just like hammer down a couple of aloe drinks and cool things down.
So Aneesa, let's just talk about Indian food for a sec. Just, like thinking about like all the things that Austin is saying, like one of the things that has always attracted me, like drawn me to Indian food, is like the color and the spices. Like when you think about like Western food, you're kind of going for a homogeneous taste. Whereas in Indian food, you've just got like your cooking is just like all these different flavors kind of, popping out together. Like, just can you talk a little bit about that? Like just spices and flavor and color and you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think like spices obviously are a huge part of how we cook in not just in Indian culture, but also, as I've explored a lot in Moroccan food as well. And I think what's interesting is there is a place and a time for every different kind of spice. So, there are certain ingredients, spices that we use all the time, especially in Indian cuisine. Like turmeric is one of them. That is constantly used. In fact, by law in India, restaurants selling food must use turmeric in their preparation. Wow. Because it's considered such a huge anti-inflammatory and antibacterial, and has so many health properties to it that it's actually, something that's used every single day in every single meal. And then there's sort of the sharp spices like the ginger and red chili peppers, cayenne, the green Thai chilies that are used in certain kinds of recipes. And then there are the warm spices like cloves and cinnamon and, which kind of constitutes garam masala, which is usually used a lot with uh, the heavier recipes that call for meats and chicken and red meat and lamb and goat and beef and those kind of ingredients. Whereas if you're cooking with vegetables and legumes and beans and rice, you do it a much lighter version and not use all of those spices. So there's definitely a place and a strategy to how those spices are used, and at what time and in what dishes, like, and also at what time of day are you using those spices? Like, we don't start out our day that way. What's interesting is, I think everyone knows I'm married to someone from Pakistan. It's very different culturally, even though India and Pakistan at one point were one country and have only recently separated. But culturally, they're so different. And at least in an Indian house, we will eat some savory, spicy dishes in the morning. But in Pakistan, they just won't do it, which is really, really interesting. So, but our level of spice that starts in the morning to us is not, necessarily spice heavy, and then we sort of get heavier. It's what you're used to.
So what's your traditional breakfast, Aneesa?
Yeah, I've recently started doing this practically every morning. I make roti and dal for the kids every day.
Nice.
So it's you take whole wheat flour and you just knead it with some water and you make dough with it, nothing else, just flour, water, you knead it. And then I roll out these round little, what they call rotis, but there's, sort of a flat bread. And then you cook it on a fry pan. You can either use some oil or not use any oil. And then I give that to the kids with a little bit of lentils that we cook with onions, tomatoes, garlic, ginger, like really good stuff to kind of get them going. It's filling, it's nutritious, it's got fiber, it's got protein, everything that they possibly could need for the day. And it just really sets the tone for your day.
That's great. I mean, okay, what's your favorite lunch? Like, I'm just curious what you eat at home. Like, what are your favorite dishes?
Yeah, so I'm from South India, which is very rice heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So for lunch, one of my absolute favorite dishes would be something called a kadai. It's made with yogurt. It's basically seasoned spiced yogurt cooked with chickpea flour. Maybe Austin's had this in his travels in India. It's a very, very popular lunchtime dish in India. So you take yogurt, you mix in chickpea flour in it. So you thicken it with this flour, and then you cook it for a long period of time, maybe a good 2-3 hours. And then you temper it with some fresh herbs and spices. And then you make onion and potato fritters that you dunk in the sauce, and then you eat it with rice. It's a very complicated dish and takes a long time to cook, but it's pretty incredible.
Gratifying. And I think a lot, like I think about like Japanese kaiseki cooking, and like that's sort of like the ultimate end of seasonality and everything. I think about farm to table.
Yeah.
Where we're talking about seasonality, and does that figure into into Indian cooking of just
100%? I think on my more recent trips in India, I've started to see sort of the trend of big supermarkets where you can get any and everything all the time. But up until even maybe 5-7 years ago, you only ate what the season brought you, whether it was vegetables or fruit or, and also by and large, India is a very vegetarian heavy, although there are plenty of non-vegetarians in India, but even the non-vegetarians are only eating meat products maybe once a month, twice a month. So, a really heavy handed dose on vegetables and legumes and unrefined food, unprocessed food, those kind of things. And it changes regionally too. So, depending on what region of India you are, you're going to see the different types of food, whether it's, in the north, they eat a lot of chickpeas and flour and those kind of things. In the south, it's very much spicier, lighter, sharper flavors. In the west, there's a lot of sweet and sour because of the desert. They don't have a lot of ingredients available to them all the time. So it depends. It also depends. It's a fascinating country to sort of do like a food travelogue of.
Well, yeah, we're waiting for you to put that trip together. In this.
On my list, Elizabeth, on my list.
So you've touched on so many things that I think, and I want to punt over to you, Austin, for a sec. But seasonality, where you're eating food that is in season, so that the energy, you're not talking about apples that have been in storage for 6 months and lost their flavor, their energy, their vibrancy and everything. You're talking about food at the peak of its nutrient cycle, and also the peak of its flavorfulness, right? And so those are really important things. Obviously, in the farm to table, there's a lot of ethos around farm to table here in the area where we live, where there's so many wonderful farmers and providers and everything. So there's the seasonality question and the cycles of the earth. But then, you both touched on sort of the cycles, our own the circadian rhythms and the cycles of the seasons and their effect on the human body and psyche. I mean, you want to take that one on, Austin? Talk about that in Ayurveda?
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on where you're living at, the earth is always going to be giving you what you need for your climate.
Yeah.
And since we're all Northeast people, I'll speak to that climate. In the springtime, we first get, leafy greens, we get asparagus, we get some blueberries. These are all designed to help us cleanse. They're very light from the wintertime. And also counterbalance. The springtime is kapha season, so it's earth and water. Earth and water are the heaviest, densest elements. So we're counterbalancing those heavy, dense elements with light things. And then once we move into the summertime, it's more hot, right? So we have more fire principle. And then, so what is the earth producing for us during the summertime? We get more sweet, juicy fruits. We get more, like vine ripened tomatoes. We get, some of our darker greens, like our more bitter greens. Bitter is a counterbalancing to heat. So we get all the vegetables that we need to cool ourselves down. And then as we start to get to the autumn and the winter, our grains start to come to harvest, our root vegetables start to come to harvest. So our hardier, denser foods start to become more available as we move into autumn and winter. Autumn is a mixture of fire and air. We're transforming from fire season to air season, vata season, which is winter. And then in winter, what we want to do is counterbalance the dryness and the lightness with earth and water. So all of our winter squashes, sweet potatoes, all of the grains that are available, all these things we use through the winter time to be heavy, to weigh us down, to make us feel full, to kind of go into that like hibernation state. And then kind of with each season, I didn't say it as I went along, but you can see the mental aspect that's going along with those, right? So in spring, we're eating light food. And what do we do in the spring? We're like, oh, like spring cleaning, we're trying to get fresh. We're trying to brighten ourselves up, right? So we lighten the load. And, that's all that light food that we're getting in the springtime. And then in the summertime, we're achieving, we're doing, we're going, we're staying active, we're getting out there, and we're, all this fire principle, is happening. And we have, again, like, just a bounty of fruits and vegetables that are available to us during the summertime to keep us going during that period. And then in the wintertime, again, we're kind of with the winter, we have snow in the Northeast, so we're a little bit more reclused, we're a little bit more hibernative, we're a little bit more contemplative. We kind of reflect on the year, it's the actual like calendar year end, so, what do we do? What have we done? So we're more contemplative, and then we eat these, heavier, denser foods to keep us grounded and not too much up in the clouds in our head.
Ooh.
and then we repeat.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that up in the clouds in your head state. So Austin, like one of the things when you came in summer of 2019 and you did an Ayurvedic meal for a group of friends, and you know, when I think of Ayurveda, going, you know, back to my early associations with it, I think of Indian food, because I mean, that is where Ayurveda started. But what was so interesting about what you did with that meal was that you didn't actually cook Indian food. You applied Ayurvedic principles to Thai food, more or less, you know, and maybe give people a little bit of a sense of like how you do that, like, you know, from a practical point of view, how you apply Ayurvedic principles to other cuisines in a very tasty and delicious way.
Yeah, absolutely. So where to start? Indian food is interesting because it actually has kind of all those cues in it already, you know, incorporating the spices, you know, into the dals, or, you know, as Aneesa, like you were saying, when you have the heavier meats, then you're having more like garam masala, you know, the cloves and the cinnamon and things like this. Cardamom helps break proteins down. Fennel enkindles the digestive fire. You know, all these different spices are counterbalancing the foods that we're eating. So it takes a lot, it seems like, anyways, from my end, maybe coming from just a Western perspective, takes a lot of kind of figuring out and calculating, like, okay, what spices are good for what things, and then from that information, how do I apply those to a new cuisine? Like, so what is available in Thai cuisine? And once you get there, then it's a little bit more simpler. So like for you know, like a meat dish, I did fish for you guys. Meat can be heating, depending on the different types of meat, but to cool it down, then we use cilantro, or we use coconut, and then to, you know, to enkindle the digestive fire. So like we opened up that whole meal with green papaya salad, and the green papaya salad, then you do that spicy to get the digestive juices flowing, to get things moving. And also the spiciness helps to digest the raw, right? So you, that's the fire principle. The fire principle is cooking the raw food in a sense. And then the acids that are incorporated in that too, as well as like the lime juice. And to totally start the whole meal, I gave everybody digestive. So at the beginning of the meal, we had, what did I do? It was white chocolate with ginger. And so the sweetness and the spiciness of the ginger actually helps to start excreting all the digestive enzymes and things like this, and prepare the body to eat food. And ginger is like a panacea. It's good for every single dosha. Anybody can take ginger. And, you know, if you're having a fun culinary experience, why not wrap ginger in chocolate to make it taste better?
I would like to recommend that every meal begin with white chocolate with ginger. Like,
yeah.
Can we make a law?
Yeah.
Well, so I want to, like, I know we're gonna, like, coming up on question time, but like I'd love for you, Aneesa, and also to just like talk a little bit about what it was like, you know, across many states.
Oh, the
like,
menu.
The menu, how you came to, you know, put a menu together tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that first, if you don't mind, Austin.
I was going to kick it over to you first.
I was most nervous about this. You know, we had sort of briefly, Elizabeth and I had talked about it, and I had sort of somewhere filed it away in the back of my head that we're going to do something like this. And then I got a call one day like, hey, here's the date. And I was like, really? But it was really, really interesting. And Austin's been so great to collaborate with. And it was, you know, great to sort of learn so many new aspects of things that I had filed away somewhere in the back of my head, because I think, like, to what Austin said, there are many cues in Indian food that's already set up to do a lot of this Ayurvedic cooking and the Ayurvedic principles, because that's just how we live our life. but a lot of times you don't realize why those things are happening, or why, you don't mix this spice with this protein, or you don't, add your yogurt to this dish. Oh, so it was great to sort of talk to Austin over the past few weeks and just refresh my memory and, all of that stuff. And putting the menu together, he was such a huge help, because again, I kept thinking, how are we going to take my sort of Moroccan style cooking and then apply the principles of Ayurveda on it? And that was a very hard leap for even me. And that's where he was so great about bridging that gap for me. So what I ended up doing tonight was sort of a twist and a fusion between a little bit of India and a little, a lot of Morocco, and using all of the ingredients that I normally would use, but just in a very different way. And I don't think I've been this thrilled in the kitchen in a long time, because obviously you cook the same stuff all the time. So even though it's great for you guys, sometimes we get jaded. So it was just such a fun afternoon for me to put the whole meal together.
Yeah, I mean, Aneesa, just like those flavors, like they were hopping all over the place.
Yeah.
So much fun you could feel the fun in the food,
Yeah, it was really, I was absolutely thrilled. So thank you so much, Austin, for helping me through it.
Yeah,
for sure. It was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun to put it together. Moroccan food is something I have, pretty much I have zero experience with.
We'll fix that next time you come to New York.
Yeah, you can give me a Moroccan education. But yeah, kind of going on the same thing, I was looking over your menu and like what dishes are there and what's common, and then how do you cater those to each dosha with ingredients that would make sense for that dish in that region. So we came up with, the different herbs that we would use and the different, fruits that we would use. Because so for anybody, people who are listening for at home, if you're cooking for like a multi-dosha family or just for yourself, like, how do you cater to your dosha? In general, Vata needs heating and moist. Pitta needs cooling and usually drying foods. And then Kapha needs heating and drying foods. So you're constantly balancing hot and cold, moisture and dryness, and so then what ingredients do you choose to incorporate with whatever dishes you're cooking or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, Austin, a couple of years ago when you took part in our Cultivate series and you did a presentation over at Skidmore about Ayurveda, you did this really ingenious thing where you cooked like little medallions of sweet potatoes, tons of them, and then you seasoned each them with like sort of a Vata sweet potato and a Pitta sweet potato and a Kapha. And in a weird way, that was like one of the most directly perceivable or tastable examples of the difference between the doshas. It was just so, I don't know, every bite sort of spoke to the dosha, which was a really cool thing. So, I mean, next to the chocolate with the ginger, that was probably well, I wish we had more time to dive into all these things. Like I know we're at a question and answer time, and Katrina, I'm gonna jump in ahead of you because I saw a question that spoke to my own heart, and that is how does Ayurveda deal with the question of sleep? I think I got the spirit of the question right. So Austin, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can get a little bit more context from you, but I'll just start with what I feel like I think you mean. Each dosha should, or is more prone to sleeping a different amount of hours. So Vata types can be like between the 7 and 9 range. Pitta types can be between like the 6 and 9 range. They can be a little bit more aggressive and go with the shorter hours. And then the Kapha types can actually be on the longer end between 8, 11, 12 hours. So it just depends on which dosha you are. And again, that would just be like a natural proneness. It's not
that my husband's lazy and he needs more sleep.
Wow.
Mine too.
Yeah. And each, body type is going to need a different amount to nourish, what they are, who they are. And that was a hard lesson actually for me at one point in my life. I actually went and did a lot of sleep research, from the Western standpoint and from, the Ayurvedic standpoint, because in my head, Western American mindset, work harder, sleep less, be more at everything, da, 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 da. And I was killing myself. And I was like, my body physically needs more sleep, based on my dosha. I'm pitta kapha, so I'm on the, I'm almost directly on the 8-hour mark, and then that's, plus or minus depending. But I was thinking I could just survive off of 6, and I was killing myself. So, you have to aim towards what your nature is and keep your nature in balance, and then you'll be able to perform so much better. You're not a lazy person if you sleep for 9 hours, but perform like a rock star for 10 hours during the day. That's not how those things work. So keeping those things in balance. And then each dosha type will have a different tendency for their style of sleep, if you will. So like vata type people, their style of dreams will be a little bit more psychedelic, a little bit more active, incongruent, and all these kind of weird things going on. Pitta type people have a tendency towards violent dreams or chasing dreams or running away dreams, or kind of like achievership goal dreams. You're trying to if you dream about work and you're trying to solve problems in your sleep, this is very pitta. And then kaphic type dreams are more still, they're more serene, they're maybe just single colors, or you might still have thoughts or might have a message come through a dream, but it's actually only a still image. Like, oh, I was at this place with you and nothing happened, but what I got from that was, that's a more kaphic type dream.
That's so interesting. Wow.
Answer.
What's really interesting about all of this is, I think at the end of the day, it's what's your dosha, right? And then once you sort of figure out what your dosha is, the idea is, are you eating correctly for that dosha? Are you living your life? Are you sleeping at the right time? Are you getting the right amount? And, kind of bringing all of that stuff into balance, because like Austin was saying, a pitta might need to sleep, before 10 p.m. to get, the most amount of the proper rest that they need, whereas another dosha could maybe go to bed at 11 p.m. and still be fine. So I think what I understood from this entire exercise for the past few weeks is it's so incredibly in tune to what your dosha is. And then, you can sort of take it from there. That can tell you a lot about yourself as a person, and also what you need to do.
Yeah,
it's back to the, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, for those of you who haven't taken a doshic quiz, it's mind blowing. It's almost like looking in a mirror going, oh, there's a reason I'm like that. It's not just some cruel quirk of fate.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because I did take the dosha quiz, and everything you just said, being I'm pitta, oh, that makes sense to me now.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
So
and it goes back to the Google Maps explanation. Sorry, of just, knowing your destination or your dosha and where you want to go to a state of balance. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's very interesting. This is all very interesting. And we do have a couple questions lined up here. So I think one of the questions, I think probably maybe some people on the line might be interested in, Ayurveda seems might be intimidating for some. What is the best way for people that might be intimidated to get more information to educate themselves on this?
If there's an Ayurvedic practitioner near you, doing a consultation is life-changing, because it's far more personalized. I guess it depends on the level of interest that you want to go on to your dive. Taking the dosha quiz, Banyan Botanicals is a very great resource. Their quiz is pretty thorough, and the information that they offer you after you go through that process is very thorough. So that's a great step in the right direction. A couple of books. One is called Prakriti by Dr. Robert Svoboda. That is just like such a beautiful and poetic book on Ayurveda. A little bit more practical kind of textbook book it's called Ayurveda, The Science of Life by Dr. Vasant Lad. And that's like a great, kind of Ayurveda 101. So yeah, if you want to do like a little bit more of just a research study to, what's Ayurveda all about, do the dosha quiz, read a book. But if you want to get a little bit more personal, absolutely, try and get a consultation from a local practitioner. And I suggest if you have access to somebody who's local, doing one in person over, a distance one.
Yeah, I not to like be promoting any, I believe there are a couple of Ayurvedic practitioners in town. The one that I personally have experience with is at India Yoga Alliance, Sanjay, who's a wonderful Ayurvedic practitioner, not just like about Ayurvedic diet, but also Ayurvedic treatments like Shirodhara and Abhyanga and other wonderful like physical treatments. So we'll make sure that we're sending you guys after this a lot of the resources. Aneesa.
All right, that's it.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, yeah, I was gonna say, does Aneesa have any thoughts on?
Yeah, what I was gonna say is it's when you think about the word Ayurveda and what that means and everything, all the facets of your life that it can kind of touch upon, it's overwhelming. So when I started to get into this after all our conversations, I did the quiz, I figured out I was a Pitta, which I had known previously because of my Ayurvedic skin doctor, and then like sort of focusing only on understanding what that meant for my body rather than trying to understand it for everything that Ayurveda could mean and for everybody that it could mean. I think breaking it down into small portions was like really helpful for me. So, once I understood that, okay, for my body type, these are the things that I need to do. And then I did those for myself. One of the things that I saw over and over again for my type of dosha, to eat cooling foods and to sleep at a certain time and to get this, and I immediately noticed a difference. And then it makes more sense to dive a little bit more into, okay, now how do I incorporate this into my exercise or into my meditation or, other parts of my life. But obviously, I think, I think of my body as a temple, and I tell my kids this all the time, and I tell everybody all this time, what you put inside your body is probably the absolute most important thing you could be doing as a human being. So if you get that right, and then your body feels right, then everything else works. It's the same principle as my husband will get, the absolute greatest kind of gas at the gas station, but then he'll be eating a McDonald's burger. I'm like, so your car is more important than your own body, right? It makes no sense. And we do this all the time. So I think understanding your dosha, figuring out what you should be eating for your dosha to feel right is a great place to start. And it's a small place to start.
There's also, I personally, there's a recipe book, a cookbook that I personally love called Everyday Ayurveda, Cooking for a Calm, Clear Mind. And she has a wonderful introduction. If you know absolutely nothing about Ayurveda, but you're interested, there's a fabulous introduction. But it also kind of gets to the kind of cooking that Austin was doing when I met him at Menla, which is called Sattvic, which is really about like using foods that really aim towards a balance, kind of a calming balance. So I can't imagine that anybody else on this call is looking for calming, balancing food, but if you are, no, kidding. But there's a lot of really wonderful cookbooks out there that give you a really nice taste of, what underlies Ayurvedic cooking principles, but then give you fun recipes in kind of a Western form, because obviously there are a lot of, herbs and spices that you may not be able to source as easily as in other ingredients. So.
Yeah, and and all the stuff that I cooked today, just so that our guests understand, was all none of it was really using a lot of the Indian spices and Indian ingredients and stuff. These were ingredients I sourced locally. I tried to cook the food as I mean, in terms of freshness, I don't mean in terms of, when the vegetables were bought, but in terms of having the flavors be very open and bright. And I think it's easily replicable in anyone's kitchen, locally. It's no different than trying to eat, farm to table and kind of eating with the seasons and that kind of stuff. So although it might seem very complicated, and of course, I think part of it is just, the idea that it's foreign, so ergo it's immediately complicated. But a lot of these things are probably things that we as people who want to eat better and live better are doing in our life anyway. So I think that's a good starting place to understand that you're already on the right track.
Yeah, and I also just to knowing both of you, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for when the people preparing the food are doing it with love and joy and enjoyment, that the people eating the food actually taste that.
Yeah.
And feel it, And I don't think,
it's like that book, like Water for Chocolate, right? And you can read that book?
Totally, it's awesome.
Yeah,
yes.
Completely.
No, it really is about just communicating. I mean, and that's why we talk about the culinary arts, because you are communicating something so deep and so beautiful and so human through the food that you make.
That's why when people ask me, why does their food not taste the same when they make it at home, but my restaurant food tastes better, I tell them it's my blood, sweat, and tears. That's what you're tasting. An extra ingredient.
So speaking about that blood, sweat, and tears, you just recently opened up a restaurant in New Jersey. Everybody is loving the delicious food that was picked up tonight. Saratoga, is it coming anytime that we can get it locally?
Everyone said to me, Aneesa, we thought we saw you in Saratoga. Why Wildwood? I am all about letting the universe sort of direct me and lead me. And I sort of, I put out a ton of stuff out there and then I see what works. And although obviously Saratoga is definitely on our, to-do list, this was just such an amazing opportunity. And it just felt right. A lot of it is gut feel. A lot of it is, does it work for the family? Does it work for the business? And the way it's going to be sort of a shore location. So summer only. And I talked to the staff and everyone was very excited about potentially doing a couple weeks on the beach. So the whole company can use it as a retreat for ourselves. So just a lot of things worked out and the building worked out. It's when things are supposed to happen, it just kind of clicks. And it all happened within 4 weeks from the day I saw the property to the day we actually opened. Yeah, so we're definitely coming to Saratoga. This was by no way stopping at me.
Sure.
No, we're all eager for it.
Yeah. Well, I predict I'm looking in my crystal ball, and I predict that you will both be in Saratoga sometime in 2021 doing stuff that's going to knock everybody's socks off.
That's what I was going to ask next, Elizabeth, if there's any culinary events that we can maybe include both of the.
Yeah, no, there's just watch this space. There's definitely going to be some really amazing stuff coming up in July. And then as the season sort of unfolds and we, clearly we're still kind of riding the rapids right now with, announcing programming and also dealing with like the roller coaster of restrictions and lifting of restrictions. But yes, there's going to be a lot more culinary arts at SPAC, and I want to see Austin and Aneesa here at SPAC, particularly in the fall. And just to take this last moment to just say how grateful I am to you, Katrina, to the junior committee, to Heather Varney, you are a rock star, to Aneesa for your ongoing presence, not just on these calls, but also in the community, all the incredible stuff that you're doing. Austin, you are a guiding star as well, and we consider you part of the family. And I just want to thank everybody who has joined us for this one and other ones, and for just coming together and saying how important it is for us all to be enjoying these things that bring us together. Food, number one. Yay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for being here. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.